All right. Counselor Campbell, I think we have a quorum.
Excellent. All right. I was just trying to get the agenda up on my computer. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to this meeting of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization. My name is Barb Campbell, and I'm the chair of the MPO, and I also serve on the Bend City Council. I see that we have with us today other members of the board. We have Robert Townsend from ODOT. Hi, Bob.
Oh.
We have Phil Chang from Deschutes County. Hi, Phil. Excellent. We have Megan Perkins, who is also a city councilor from Bend. And those are the members of the MPO board. Hovey, would you like to have the honor of introducing staff and any guests? Oh, you're muted.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
There we go.
I will be happy to
Thank you.
share the rest of the crew that's here. So we have Tyler Dickey, Bend MPO manager, myself, Hovey Anderson, Bend MPO program coordinator. Ooh, words today. Andrea Napoli, senior planner for the MPO. And we have many folks from DLCD. We have Evan Mandel, Angie Brewer, Cody Meyer, just going through the list here, and Bill Holmstrom and Kevin Young. I think that's the crew for DLCD. City of Bend, we have Damian Cernick. ODOT, we have David Amerton, Rick Williams. City of Bend, we have, I think I just lost David Abbas, but he was here a second ago. Mm-hmm. There you are. There you are. Sorry, on my list. And Toby Marks, City of Bend parking manager. And then we have Michael Robinson, citizen member, as far as I know. And I think last but not least, Cameron Prow, typewrite 2. She's going to do our minutes and has a personal service contract with us to help provide those services. I think we got everybody.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hovey, and welcome everyone. Hovey will also help us with agenda item 2, which is our virtual meeting guidelines. Hovey, take it away.
All right. So remember to raise your hand if you have any questions throughout this meeting. We will do our best to get to you as soon as there's a break in the topic, or as we can. But anytime you have any issues, just raise your hand. We'll find that. This meeting's being recorded, so you'll see it again on YouTube if you would like to catch a snippet of it. Or also, there's also live transcripts available if you want to turn those on or off. It's at the bottom of your screen. You'll be able to see those. I think I've got one more person popped in. Tori Cars from our City of Bend Finance Department, and she helped with the budget that we'll be discussing as one of our next topics. All right.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Agenda item number 3 is public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone that would like to make a comment to the Bend MPO to speak up. I'm looking for virtual hands.
I don't see anybody waving in any way, virtually or on camera.
Neither do I. All right. so that takes us right to agenda item number 4, which is the 2020. Oh, I'm so sorry. Agenda item number 4, we need meeting minutes. I would happily accept a motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve the March 15th, 2022 Policy Board draft meeting minutes as presented.
Second.
Thank you. We've got a motion from Councillor Perkins and a second from Commissioner Chang. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. That gets us to item 5, which is the 2022-2023 approved budget public hearing and adoption. Tyler Diekey will take us through this agenda item.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. So just to remind everyone, we had our budget committee meeting a little over a week ago, and the budget committee recommended that the policy board approve the proposed budget. And I guess the question I have for you is, do you want us to walk through some of the highlights of that budget document again, or do you want to move straight to holding a public hearing and adopting the budget, the approved budget?
If anyone would like to have an overview again, speak now, raise hands. I don't see any. I think we can go ahead and move on, Tyler.
All right, so Counselor, we need you to open a public hearing.
All right, let me see. I have something I can make a noise with. I open this public hearing for the policy board to consider adoption of the 2022-2023 approved budget. Would anyone like to speak on this matter?
I don't see anything on my end as far as indications.
I don't either. So I will close the public hearing and ask for a motion.
I move approval of the fiscal year 2022-2023 approved budget. And I'm sorry, did I say adoption or okay, adoption or approval? I move adoption of the fiscal year 2022-2023 approved budget and make appropriations by means of resolution. I'm not seeing the full resolution number. Is there something?
2022-03.
Okay, so I'm not, it looks like it's just a little cut off. Yeah, by means of resolution 2022-03.
I will second.
Thank you. We've got a motion from Commissioner Chang and a second from Councillor Perkins. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous. I should have taken the time for discussion to thank staff for all of their hard work on the budget. They make it very easy for us, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much. You made our budget committee meeting quite simple, and we appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Our next item is item number 6, and that is the 2022-2023 Unified Planning Work Program Adoption. Tyler Diekey will take us through this one.
We'll do this kind of the same way we did the budget. So the work program, this is our more detailed version of the budget that we submit to the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration each year. We provide detailed reviews of the draft UPWP at our February Technical Advisory Committee and Policy Board meetings. We met with ODOT, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration in February, and received their comments and updated the document based on what we heard from them. We've provided public notice of the draft document, and we did not receive any submitted public comments on the draft work program for next fiscal year. And again, I will ask, do you want us to review any part of that draft work program, or do you want to go straight to considering adoption of that draft work program?
Is there anyone that would like to go through the program? Please raise your hand if so. I don't see any hands. Thank you, Tyler. And that being the case, I would entertain a motion.
I move to adopt the 2022-23 Unified Planning Work Program by means of Resolution 2022-04.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Councillor Perkins and a second from Commissioner Chang. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous. And I will take the time again to thank staff and to thank all the members of the Budget Committee. Today's meeting makes it seem so very easy, but there was a lot of work behind the scenes by staff, and we had our Budget Committee meeting a week ago. So thank you, everyone, for making that seem so easy. That brings us on to agenda item number 7. This is an information item, and we've scheduled plenty of time for discussion about this topic, which is so very important. It's the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities rulemaking, and we've got DLCD staff with us here today. Tyler, would you like to introduce folks for us?
Yeah, I think I will start. I mean, Evan Manville, I believe, is going to start this discussion. This has been a multi-pronged effort on DLCD's staff part to implement these rules. And so we also have Bill Holmstrom, Kevin Young, and Cody Meyer, and they're each going to talk, about very different components of this rulemaking process. We also have Damien Siernick here, who has been tracking this effort pretty closely and participating on behalf of the city of Bend. And with that, I'll just let Evan jump in and start the presentation. And I think we had the same presentation at the Technical Advisory Committee a couple of weeks ago, and we had just a tremendous amount of interaction with our TAC members, and I'm hoping we will have the same today with you, our board members. So Evan, you can take it away.
Thank you, Tyler. Yes, so Evan Manville, I'm a climate mitigation planner here at DLCD, he, him pronouns. So we are engaged in a rulemaking. Our commission is considering rules on climate friendly and equitable communities. And it is a big lift. That's why there are a bunch of us here. But we're excited to be here and working on this. Next slide. So the rulemaking came in part out of Governor Brown's Climate Executive Order 2004. She issued that in March 2020. And she told us and a bunch of other state agencies to exercise any and all authority and discretion to meet Oregon's climate pollution reduction goals, that we weren't getting it done and we needed to do more. And as we did that work to prioritize equity, underserved population, historically marginalized communities, she specifically directed us to work with ODOT to update the state's transportation planning rules and to figure out how to use land use and transportation tools to reduce climate pollution related to transportation. Next slide. She did that in part because we're pretty far off track and we're looking to be even more off track in meeting Oregon's legislatively adopted climate pollution reductions targets. some sectors of the economy are making more progress than transportation, but transportation is now Oregon's largest slice of carbon pollution. It's about 38% of climate pollution comes from transportation in Oregon. And that has real world effects. The failure to meet our goals has real world effects on Oregonians. People are losing their homes, they're losing their lives out of more extreme weather events happening more frequently and with more extremity. So we all have experienced that. You all have experienced that with wildfires. Not all of it's, directly tied to climate pollution, but the number and the magnitude are increasing because of climate pollution. So if we don't get on track, by 2050, we'll have about 4 times as much pollution as the legislature directed us to have from transportation. So next slide. The other thrust of this rulemaking is equity, and land use and transportation have deep ties in Oregon to inequity. Some of the decisions in the past, both in how we locate our roads and major highways, to using redlining and its replacement zoning to kind of concentrate wealth and privilege in certain populations and at the expense of other populations. It's pretty clear. So the line on the left is, of course, a redlining map. Certain communities benefited back when redlining was legal. And then what happened over the last couple of generations is that wealth got passed down. So that's meant that intergenerational wealth from those past decisions means that the average white household today has about 10 times the average wealth as the average Black household. So there are a lot of challenges in front of us. Next slide. This rulemaking is focused on where most Oregonians live and where most transportation climate pollution happens, which is the 8 metro areas. Outside of these areas, the rules don't have any practical effect. So Bend is, of course, one of those. But yeah, you can kind of see the rest of the areas. Next slide. We've been at this for about 2 years. We're reaching the end, hopefully, of the rulemaking and starting into the implementation phase. It's been a pretty engaged couple of years. And lately with over-engagement, oversampling of the Bend voices, which has been great. Been having lots of meetings, and Commissioner Lelak's been having a lot of meetings with folks over there. But it's really been thinking about where we're going, pulling together a great rulemaking advisory committee with representatives from all 8 areas, having a bunch of community meetings and really dialing it in along the way. And so we're hoping in May to get adoption and then implementation from there as local communities figure out how these rules, they want to apply these rules to their communities. Next slide. So there are 2 main thrusts of this rulemaking. The first is kind of regions working together to figure out a plan for the region to meet the climate pollution reduction targets. And the second is just updating the Oregon's core land use and transportation rules on how communities do land use and transportation plans. And there's performance monitoring and reporting under both. And next slide is Cody's.
Thank you, Evan. Cody Meyer, Land Use Transportation Planner here with DLCD, him. Yeah, I just want to give a quick, maybe a little overcomplicated schematic here, but how we have set as an agency as directed by the legislature, climate pollution reduction targets for the metropolitan areas in the state, and how we are proposing to connect those down to the local planning efforts through this rulemaking. And really, it's a fairly simple technique. It's performance-based planning. It's the concept of you can't manage what you don't measure. So looking at measuring the actions that are necessary to reach the climate reduction targets. And so those are things like increased bike ped facilities, more mixed-use development and people living within walking distance of transit, more transportation demand management programs, enhanced stuff like that. So What we will be doing is we're putting together a contract with ODOT to set up a performance and monitoring system, which will be going to work with locals to say, here's an assessment of what you have in store for your plans, if you should carry those out, and how far would that get you towards the kind of levels of ambition needed to reach the greenhouse gas reduction target. So we have a pretty good understanding of what it takes in those targets. And so really it's just a gap analysis saying, okay, what's the gap between what you have in your adopted plans and what would be needed to meet the climate pollution reduction goal. And in the transportation planning rules we're proposing, in the rules 900 would be saying, propose corrective actions. So what do we need to close those gaps? What do we need to kind of buy down the emissions and increase outcomes for health and equity and a range of community needs. And then you go across your 4-year cycle here and you make strides, and then you come back and do an assessment, and you just submit a report and say, okay, looks like we closed the transit gap a little bit, but we still have an active transportation gap there. And so we think our corrective actions would be to place more emphasis on building out the bike ped system. So that's a rolling cycle. We've proposed it to be in concert with the RTP cycle for every metropolitan area. So we're kind of unifying and collecting data. We don't have kind of these redundant efforts going on, that we're doing these things across the same cycle. There's some higher bar for the largest metropolitan areas in the state, Metro, Eugene, Springfield, Salem, Kaiser, the biggest 3 metro areas, and they are required to do a regional preferred scenario to essentially arrive at this same system of performance monitoring. So for other areas, it is optional. The areas can opt in, or there's some criteria in there for our commission to decide if there's, VMT is like really running away in an area. There might be some enforcement order coming that says, okay, we need to talk about this, and these corrective actions or different criteria would kind of kick the requirements down to other metropolitan areas. But for now, it's just the big 3 that need to do that plan, and everyone else is kind of an optional. So Evan, back to you, or?
Yeah, thanks, Cody. So our commission, in their charge to us, directed us to take on 6 key things as we updated the land use and transportation rules. First, to think about climate-friendly areas, and we'll go into what those are in a minute. Reforming parking management, supporting electric vehicle charging, boosting our networks of transportation options so people have quality choices. Thinking about how we measure transportation performance beyond just congestion, and figuring out how we build a list of projects that can actually meet our climate and equity outcomes that we're aiming for. So those are the 6 main areas. Kevin.
Thank you, Evan. My name is Kevin Young. I'm a senior urban planner with the LCD, he, him pronouns. I'm going to talk a little bit about climate-friendly areas. And, why is this a component of the rules? Well, it recognizes the very strong relationship between land use and transportation. We all know that where people live and work and obtain services has a big impact on their transportation needs. And so the climate-friendly area concept is one many of you are probably familiar with. Transit-oriented development is one incarnation of this, but essentially the rules would require local governments within the region, cities population 5,000 and over, to designate climate-friendly areas, which are walkable mixed-use areas that allow a mixture of uses, obviously residential, office, retail, etc. Within these areas, so that people are less reliant on automobiles to meet their daily needs. The way the rules are structured for cities of 10,000, of more than 10,000, is that the requirements would require zoning to accommodate at least 30% of housing needs. So the capacity of the CFA should be sized to accommodate at least 30% of overall housing needs that is different from land allocated to residential needs, which the rules will not impact in terms of other zoning for other residential needs. The rules will actually provide additional capacity for residential and also employment and other uses. One of the critical components to make the climate-friendly areas work well and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is high-quality pedestrian, bicycle, and transit services in these areas and connecting to key destinations, connecting these areas to key destinations. Parking reform is also an important component to make sure that we're using the land efficiently and not providing too much prioritization on the needs of automobiles within climate-friendly areas at the expense of other modes of transportation, transit, bike, pedestrian. The draft rules allow for abutting high-density residential or employment areas to be included as climate-friendly areas. So those might be single-use zones, but those single uses will actually support climate-friendly areas to work in the ways that we want them to by providing, employment opportunities and services for abutting high-density residential or, residential opportunities for abutting employment uses. The rules provide two options for local governments to follow, either a prescriptive path or an outcome-based path or standard. Next slide, please. And I'll review these in a little bit of detail. So this table shows you the current draft in terms of the requirements. The column to the left is basically, by size of jurisdiction. Those smallest cities and urbanized county areas are required, that's population between 5 and 10,000, required to designate at least 25 acres of land as climate-friendly areas. Generally we expect these central climate-friendly areas to be located in existing downtowns. Many of those downtown areas are already zoned to allow for a mixture of uses. Many of them developed, at the early part of the 20th century when things were less, car dependent. And so the infrastructure there is in place in many areas to support the needs or the goals that we're trying to advance. So as the cities increase in size, once you go over the 10,000 population, the CFAs are sized to accommodate, again, at least 30% of housing. So the zoning and development standards are calibrated to allow for the development of 30% of overall housing needs. The prescriptive path in the blue two columns there in the middle is basically just a set of very bare bones standards, two aspects to it: minimum residential densities and maximum allowed building heights. So this is not a requirement to build buildings to this height, but a requirement to allow buildings to at least meet these heights. And so for the smaller cities, those densities and those allowed heights are lower. As we get to the larger cities, those densities are higher. And I should say the minimum residential density applies only to purely residential development. So if a building is 100% residential, it would be held to the minimum residential density standard. However, if it's a mixed use building, as many are in these areas where you're going to have services and businesses on maybe the ground floor and residential above, the minimum density requirements would not apply. Instead, there is an FAR or floor area ratio standard that requires some level of intensity for those types of development. So that's the prescriptive path. The outcome-oriented path allows the local government to, basically make the case that, hey, we either have existing development standards or we're working on a set of development standards that will enable these levels of development in our climate-friendly areas. And these standards are basically allowing for development that would, for example, for Bend, which is, a large city, allow for at least 40 homes and 40 jobs per net acre. And I'll say allow for, not require. It's just that the zoning needs to be designed to allow for that level of development. Next slide, please. In terms of the timeline for local government implementation, the current draft has local governments first doing a study by June 30 of 2023. So this is looking at all of the potential areas that might be zoned as climate-friendly areas within the jurisdiction. And the good news here is that the department has secured funding to support that work in the 7 regions where this will apply. So these rules apply outside of Portland Metro. Portland Metro is already implementing their Climate Smart Communities program, and our rules in Portland Metro are designed to support that. But in the other 7 areas, the local governments will be doing the studies, will be able to support that work, looking at potential climate-friendly areas, along with an analysis of equitable housing outcomes. Because as Evan mentioned, equity is an important part of the work that we're doing. And we know that with zone changes, sometimes there's the potential for displacement of underserved populations. And so the local governments would also do an analysis of those equitable housing outcomes. Good news there is that we have already provided, the department has developed an anti-displacement and gentrification toolkit for local governments to use. And we're working on developing a mapping application that will be available statewide for local governments to use to provide data, spatial data that will inform this analysis. So that's in year 1. In year 2, the local governments would adopt zoning and comprehensive plan amendments by June 30 of 2024. So that's the point at which they're actually making decisions. Where do we want to designate climate-friendly areas, and then putting in place those zoning requirements by the end of June 2024. Next slide, please. There's also a link to our existing housing rules. So Goal 10 is the statewide planning rule that relates to housing. And what we've done is to design these standards to interact with the new requirement for local governments over 10,000 population to monitor and report on housing production, following their analysis of their housing capacity, housing needs analyses or housing capacity analyses, which in the Bend area will be completed every 8 years. So 1 year following completion of a report, the HNA, the housing needs analysis that identifies housing needs for City of Bend, 1 year following that, the City of Bend would develop housing production strategies, which are basically the tools and actions the city plans to utilize to meet the housing needs that were identified. The tie-in with climate-friendly areas is that part of the monitoring and reporting from that housing production strategy work will specifically focus on climate-friendly areas and look at housing production in climate-friendly areas, and also affordable housing production and accessible housing production in climate-friendly areas. Lastly, beginning June 30 of 2027, the rules would have local governments designating additional climate-friendly areas in conjunction with urban growth boundary expansions based on residential needs. This doesn't allocate the UGB expansion area. It does not require the local government to place climate-friendly areas in those areas, and in many cases those won't make sense because generally they're out on the edge. But it does require additional efficiency of land uses within the jurisdiction in conjunction with that residential expansion. But it does not take the place of the land needs that have been identified for the UGB expansion. And sorry, I just got a message from my computer. And I think that's it for climate-friendly areas. Yes, turn it back to Evan. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. And we'll circle back with questions afterwards. I know there's a lot here. So parking management, parking reform. The draft rules on parking reform try to do 3 things. The first is take some best practices for parking code details, how you measure parking, some things about larger parking lots, options like, hey, if it's nearby, you can provide parking, that sort of thing. And has cities do those. The second is kind of the core big thing, and that's saying, hey, choose one of three options, communities. Sorry, step back. Parking matters a lot because it, in part, can displace housing. It has big impacts on housing costs. It pushes uses farther apart if there's a lot of parking, so it makes it a less walkable community. And it encourages driving. If we provide a lot of free parking everywhere, people will own slightly more cars and drive somewhat more. So that's why we're taking out parking. So back to what the rules do. The three things that the three options for communities in reforming parking. The first is to say, hey, we're going to let the diversity of developments provide a diversity of parking. And that's kind of a market-based approach. It's been used around the world for the last couple of decades, and it tends to work pretty well. Some people provide a lot of parking, some people provide less parking. The second and third options, if communities aren't quite ready to take that step, because it can seem scary, or that they don't want to do it, they say, okay, for certain types of development and in certain areas, we're going to reduce parking mandates. So these are, the requirements when you put stuff in that you have to provide a bunch of parking. So options 2 and 3 say near frequent transit, we're not going to have parking mandates. We're going to reduce parking mandates for things like smaller unit, or we're going to remove parking mandates for super small units. We're going to reduce it for multifamily, that sort of thing. And then option 2 says on top of that, we're going to communities can choose to adopt some policies that are kind of best parking policies. And we ask folks to do 3 of 5 of those, at least 3 of 5. So one's like renting your unit separate from your parking space. That's called unbundling parking. Has a significant impact on how much people end up owning cars and driving. Option 3, if you don't want to do that, set those 3 of those 5 policies, is just to do a reform parking mandates for more types of development and in more areas. So those are kind of the 3 options communities would have under the draft rules for reforming their parking mandates. The last thing the parking rules do is it asks the most populous communities to do a little bit more parking management. So that on-street parking management, it's a big part of what makes up city land. Takes up about 20% of city land. Generally, the on-street and off-street are about each 10%. So kind of manage that better instead of requiring a bunch more. So manage your existing resources. So that's what the parking, I think we have a second slide. Next slide. Yeah, so this is about the more populous communities. Bend is about to be one, if not one officially. You're going to be at 100,000. I get it. Parking maximums, making sure we don't really excessively overbuild parking. They're not very tight parking maximums, but they are the rules. And the second is saying, hey, do some of that management of the on-street parking. So price 5% of your on-street spaces or 10% of your spaces, and have it actually not just be a $10 a year permit, but actually, okay, it costs at least 50 cents a day to park your car somewhere. So that's there. And then there are additional requirements for the over 150 that you'll get to in probably 2 years the way you're growing. No, I'm kidding. You won't get quite there, but there are some additional things there. So next slide. On electric vehicle charging, what we're trying to do is kind of build on what the legislature did in House Bill 2180 last session, or the session before. It's all a blur. And that's just saying, hey, let's have new development be ready for EVs once they come. And it's just putting in the conduit that's relatively cheap to put in for new development, but is expensive to retrofit. It's not putting in the wiring itself. It's not putting in the EV charging stations. It's not putting in the transformers. It's just saying, hey, let's have the tubes in the walls and the floors, so it's ready. So this rule would say for 50% of parking spaces in new large residential and mixed use developments that you would have to have conduit ready there. So that's what that does. Next slide.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, everybody. My name is Bill Holmstrom. I'm at DLDC Staff. I'm the agency's Land Use and Transportation Planning Coordinator, and happy to be with you here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about our transportation planning rules and some changes that we're proposing to make to them in alignment with the governor's order and what we've talked about today. Real quick background, we've had rules on the books for decades in Oregon for how local governments are supposed to do coordinated land use and transportation planning, and they've led to a lot of good outcomes. We do better than a lot of other places in this country in terms of our land use and transportation, and so it's a good thing that we've had those for decades. But we know that we've got some more to do. We need to do more in order to meet our climate and equity goals. But we don't need to throw everything out. We can build on what we have, and that's what we've tried to do with our draft rules for planning within the metropolitan areas. In particular, we're putting a renewed focus on planning for our pedestrian, bicycle, and public transportation networks. Not to say that, of course, we've done a lot of planning for them in the past, and we'll continue to do that, but we want to make sure that we're, focusing on that planning. Again, I also want to make sure that, we're still planning for people to be able to drive around in their cars, and we're not getting rid of any requirements there or anything like that. But you just want to make sure that, we've done a good job over the last half a century or so, making sure that we've got a complete network of people so you can drive from point A to point B. Same can't be said of incomplete sidewalks, inexistent bicycle facilities or transit service that doesn't run when and where people need it. So really focusing on those, making sure that we have connected, safe, and complete networks, and working toward filling those gaps. In particular, we want to make sure that we're prioritizing climate-friendly areas, those places that Kevin talked about a little while ago, that we're focusing on making sure that we're paying attention to neighborhoods with underserved populations. These are places that have had disinvestment over the years. These are places where maybe there have been investments that have been harmful over the years. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention and meeting the needs of the community in those places. And of course, we want to make sure that we're providing access to key destinations within the community, just to make sure that people can get to where they're going, whether that's school, shopping, work, medical appointments, you name it. People can meet their daily needs, more of their daily needs, without necessarily having to drive a car. That's the goal that we're shooting at here. Of course, people will still be driving cars. A lot of places that will still be happening. That's not going to change overnight, but we want to move in the direction of giving people more options with our systems. A couple of things that we're also doing is we're helping local governments, giving them some guidance for how they select transportation projects within their plans. And they will be using a variety of prioritization factors, and we're giving local governments some flexibility about how they weight those factors. But in general, we want the projects across the city, across the local jurisdiction, to work towards meeting our climate goals. And so we do have a few guidelines for how that process works within the local transportation system plan. The other piece is, we want to make sure that we're measuring success in a transportation system in a way that really gets at our values. Right now, we have a system where we do a really good job of figuring out how many, vehicles move through an intersection during peak hours. That's not bad. We're getting rid of that. That's an important measure, but that doesn't get at a lot of other things which are important to us, like safety. It doesn't get at our climate goals. It doesn't get at, are we providing access to people? How about people that aren't in cars? There's a lot of different pieces here that we're giving flexibility to local governments to start measuring some of those other factors as well in their transportation system. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go to my next slide, which is a little bit about process here and where we are in our rulemaking. And this is our last slide before we open it up to questions and discussion. Our commission held its first public hearing on March 31st, so just a few weeks ago. And like Evan said earlier, we've been going through this process with our commission for over 2 years now. So this isn't new to them, but this, in terms of the formal rulemaking process and adoption, this was their first public hearing. We expect to have our second hearing on May 19th, and that's when we expect the commission to adopt the rules. That's going to be up to them whether or not they do that and what they decide to do at that point. And then the rules would become effective sometime in June. We're working right now simultaneously with wrapping up the rulemaking process itself and getting the rules adopted. We are working on how are we going to roll these out to local governments. How are we going to help local governments make this work? What financial resources, what guidance are we going to be able to provide? And Cody and Evan in particular are really working on all the different pieces there to make sure that we're setting local governments up for success here. So I think with that, I am happy to help take any questions or have a discussion. Chair Campbell, and back to you.
Thank you so much. That is a lot of excellent information. Are there any questions? Councillor Perkins, go right ahead.
Just a elementary question here. So let's say the city of Bend designates 2 climate-friendly areas. Does that mean 60% of our housing needs, or does that just mean 30 cumulative among the 2?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's cumulative. So I didn't mention in my earlier presentation. So the rules require local governments to designate a primary climate-friendly area, which would be the one with the highest minimum densities and all of that. But they may choose less intensive climate-friendly areas elsewhere. So like community centers or nodes or what have you. And cumulatively, yeah, all of the climate-friendly areas would need to accommodate at least 30% of housing. Okay.
I will extend on to that. So my understanding is that if our climate-friendly area doesn't have the capacity for 30%, then we have to create another climate-friendly area that has capacity for 50%. Did I get that right? There was a 30% number and a 50% number. Am I right?
No, it's just the 30%. Yeah, okay. But no, just to be clear, it's sort of a rolling number. So, the rules as cities grow, they will continue to need to accommodate at least 30% or zone for at least 30% of housing needs in climate-friendly areas, but it's always 30%. And that can be accommodated in one or many climate-friendly areas. And again, that number is a zoned capacity. It's not saying you can't, 30% it's not saying 30% of your housing has to be in these areas. We're basically setting the table to allow for that to occur over time.
And Kevin, I don't know if you used the 50% about UGB expansions or not, or if that's didn't come up at all.
Yeah, no, that's right. So the 50% number comes in with the UGB expansion. And so that is a requirement where the local government, so there's a scenario, let's say hypothetically, the housing needs analysis finds we need 200 more units of housing. Those might be low density residential units. And, the city looks at adopting efficiency measures. They do all that work, which is required first. And then they still find, hey, we need to expand our urban growth boundary. And so they're allowed to do that to meet that 200 unit need. Concurrently with that, they're required to designate additional climate friendly areas to accommodate half of that identified need. So that would be 100 units. And again, that's sort of zoned capacity, not not at the same level of land allocation, if you will.
Thank you. That was the thing I was curious about. And then if we do get to that point, do we have to have a new climate friendly area that is within the new land, or can we designate climate friendly that's in the old UGB? I'm way in the weeds right now. I don't know.
No, that's a good question. And no, so the requirement is not to designate CFAs climate friendly areas in the newly expanded area. A local government can do that. I think in many cases it's not going to be a great candidate for climate friendly area because it's going to be out on the edge. So the local government would then need to look at other areas within the city that they can designate as climate friendly areas, or conceivably they might have a less intensive climate friendly area that they want to expand, allowances for to address that capacity need. So if you're looking for 100 units, you could actually increase the intensity within an existing climate friendly area to pick up that additional capacity.
Or Kevin, you could, for example, add another couple blocks onto an existing climate friendly area, expand an existing, you don't have to create a new area necessarily. Yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Commissioner Chang.
So I'm trying to visualize how these program elements are going to land within Bend and the Bend MPO. I particularly wanted to ask about the improving parking management element and the climate friendly areas. I'm hoping that somebody between DLCD and City of Bend representatives, somebody can tell me where we're at already in terms of making the kinds of parking management changes that are envisioned by this program, in terms of mandate, kind of outright repeal of mandates, or kind of reducing mandates in specific developments and areas. So that's the first question. And then the second question is, do we have a sense of where the climate friendly areas are likely to be, the places that are closest, the neighborhoods that are closest that could kind of with certain kinds of improvements and investments, get to climate friendly area designation.
I'll do. Damien, are you aware of Bend's parking code more than I, because I'm not very, other than I think the central district, but yeah, go ahead.
I will do my best to correctly convey what I think we've already done so far. I think the city has already done some changes to our parking standards through the work that was done to implement House Bill 2001, which was the middle housing bill adopted by the 2019 legislature. And that did reduce some parking requirements for middle housing types, for types of middle housing that are now allowed across residential zones where we allow a single family home. With respect to likely climate friendly areas, we've done some thinking about this internally. Preliminarily, the core area in Bend looks like a good candidate. It looks like it's based on the planning that's already been done furthest along to possibly a climate friendly area. I think some other potential candidates include maybe the Core Pine area, and then some of the area around OSU Cascades on the west side. I think if we were to start that today, I think those are the three areas we would start looking at to see if those would be, part of our universe of climate friendly areas, or if one of them was ready to be designated by June 30th of 2024.
Well, excuse me, I'll just follow up on what Damien said about parking. I believe DLCD had a model parking code, that was developed many years ago. Am I correct about that? So I think the city of Bend implemented quite a bit of that, probably 5 or 6 years ago, Damien, 7 years ago. And then, following some of that parking reform that was done at that time, then the city of Bend had a 3-phased parking planning process that they undertook back in like 2017, I believe, that did some further refinements to parking code requirements throughout, or in a number of different areas in the community, and focused in on revising parking requirements for a handful of specific uses, particularly restaurants and multifamily housing.
I think that timing sounds about right, Taylor, because I know it's in the 2017 time period that the city completed the parking study, where actually did sampling and inventorying a number of parking, the amount of parking for a selected number of uses. And I know it's available somewhere on our website. If there's interest, I can track down links and then include it in the chat, or have it shared with the minutes.
I can add that to the minutes if you want to share that with me, Damien. That'd be great.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Perkins.
Yeah, this one is just about, so the effective date you're thinking is June of 2022, and then it said local actions begin. And it said setting performance measures, parking reform, CFA. So what's the timeline for that? If you could just clarify, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Campbell, Councilor Perkins. So the rules do lay out kind of an interim kind of transition period from where we are now to, where we'll end up in the future of about 5 to 7 years, depending on the piece of it. Different pieces kind of have come in at different times. One thing in particular that we know we're going to be doing in the next year is identifying, studying the places where we think climate-friendly areas make the most sense. And then we'll be taking the time after that to do the implementation work of those areas, the zoning, that piece of it after that. So that's really important for developing a lot of the transportation pieces of it, to make sure that we're focusing on those areas. So and kind of understanding what the land use implications are, kind of have that connection to transportation. So and we're going to have that discussion with our commission. They've asked us to give them a series of options for different pieces of it. So in May, we are going to be giving the commission a handful of options. But I think, even though the rules take effect on June 22nd, we're allowing local governments say that are already working on updating a transportation system plan to use existing rules through the end of the year if they're in the middle of a process, for example. So, we're trying to give some grace there. And over the next 5 years, we're going to let people kind of do incremental changes if they want to, so they don't have to do everything all at once. There's not enough resources really to, at the state level to do that. We just had a meeting this morning with some folks over at ODOT who are, providing some of the financial resources to make these things happen, and just trying to figure out what's the timing of making that happen, and making sure our rules don't paint the state or local governments in a corner, and giving us the flexibility to make that happen.
And just to add on to what Bill said, that the parking reform is also on a shorter timeline. The parking reform and climate-friendly area stuff in the current draft is on a shorter timeline, and the TSP is kind of more nuanced. But yeah, there's a publication on our website called Implementation Task Summary, but as some of those details may change, I wouldn't over rely on with that calendar.
Could you tell me about vehicle miles traveled? Will there be changes to how we are measuring or, counting, planning for reduced VMT?
I think that's for me. So Chair Campbell. Yes, there will be changes. So starting down in the weeds, I will say that the definition of vehicle miles traveled per capita is different than was in the original transportation planning rules for metropolitan areas. So just real wonky here, but that definition was for internal trips only. So it's kind of like a really thin slice of the VMT, and that wasn't really working out very well. It was kind of like a special modeling task that we'd have to do, and didn't seem to really. Anyway, long story short, we have a definition of vehicle miles traveled in our greenhouse gas reduction planning rules, Division 44, that we are using for both now, for transportation planning rules, for the rules we're doing, and to maintain it for that. And that is based on household travel. So it's really, it's the household VMT that occurs from the households who live in a metropolitan area in the state. So if your Bend planning boundary for the MPO would be every household that lives in that planning boundary, you're counting the vehicle miles traveled on a per capita basis that is from household travel. So we're not capturing if I live in Redmond and I'm driving to Bend, or if there's freight throughput on 97, like those kind of things don't count. So that's really kind of a line. That was a big thing that we worked on with other state agencies and metropolitan areas at some modeling task forces to say, hey, we need to make a kind of a unified definition here. So that's the real weeds answer. The other thing I'll just say is that the rules are requiring that when you do a major update to a TSP, that the project list, the fiscally constrained project list for a city or a county needs to show a reduction in overall vehicle miles traveled. So that's the requirement. Previously, they had in the rules some different requirements for VMT reduction, which was just kind of a little tricky to get at when we measured it. So we do have performance measures that will be set using VMT as a performance measure, and we expect folks to track progress towards the performance measure of VMT that's kind of calibrated towards achieving your greenhouse gas reduction target. But as a constraint for adopting a plan, it's just an overall reduction, that we stop increasing VMT per capita from your base year to your rising year with the projects you're putting into your plan.
We recently passed a transportation go bond, and will be building those projects for the next 10 years. Will those projects be affected?
No, if they're in your acknowledged TSP, you keep your acknowledged TSP, and it's not on a project by project basis. So the VMT reduction is measured as the summation of all the projects and policies in your plan and fiscally constrained project list. So it's not one project must demonstrate that. It's
And Chair Campbell, I do want to note that, city staff had highlighted that issue for us earlier, and we specifically carved out a way for local governments to, use, basically, if there's bond funded projects that were adopted when you adopted it, I forget the exact date, but we made sure Ben was the issue there, that you can use that as a factor of prioritizing your projects in your project list. So you've got that ready to go.
I will add a caveat here, though, to my response, is that the rules are really centered on making findings towards demonstrating progress towards reducing VMT per capita. So we want decisions to be aligned with the intent, is that we, if you look at the data, we've reached peak VMT since 2008 in the state. It's not been growing on a per capita basis. It's kind of flatlined. So we're just really saying, like, let's draw a line in the sand. We're not saying you have to make people stop driving. It's to say, on a per capita basis, that we want to make sure that, like, we're not investing in projects that are really increasing the amount of driving that people have to do. And we want to really invest in the projects that increase transportation options for folks, to build out the systems of transit, bike, ped, things that have been underinvested in that we need to do.
Thank you. We appreciate that you are paying attention to our Go Bond. Commissioner Chang, go ahead.
Have we discussed, resources, technical assistance, funding that the state might make available? Did I miss like a chunk there? No. Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to ask. I know that DLCD is not like a major grant making organization, but I'm wondering if within the state apparatus there was going to be resources to support communities in doing some of the work that's needed to achieve the goals of these programs.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Chair Campbell, Commissioner Chang. We have a range. We've been working closely with ODOT, which, as you know, I think has bigger pockets than we do, to help fund pieces of this. We have DLCD has about $768,000 this biennium to help get the climate-friendly area planning areas started for all those the affected jurisdictions. So we'll be working on that right away because we need to spend that money in the next 14 months or so. So that's happening right now. We're getting those up and running, starting to figure out where we're going to contract with folks for that. We have 4 million or so, I can't remember exactly, from ODOT for doing kind of the regional scenario planning. Primarily, we're starting in the Eugene, Springfield, and Salem Kaiser areas for that, but we're also going to be doing some other work with the other metropolitan areas around the state to do some kind of the regional look at where we've been and where we need to be going. And then most recently, $15 million from the federal infrastructure bill. The Oregon Transportation Commission made a decision to direct $15 million of that toward doing some of the climate planning work at and the transportation planning work at local governments around the state, along with this rule. Some of that is going to go toward statewide efforts to help local governments. For example, there's a couple different pieces, but for example, we have enhanced requirements for bicycle and pedestrian inventory that maybe some other local governments haven't done before in our rules. We're working with ODOT to make sure that we can do that at the statewide level, and we can just basically say, the state can say, here you go, here's your inventory. You don't really have to do any work, but you've got the information now to move forward with your plan. We think that'll be helpful for local governments. We're going to be doing that, but also a big chunk of that is going to be going directly to local governments to help them do the planning that's going to be required here. And that's on top of all the existing funding sources that local governments already use to do transportation system planning and land use planning. So like I said, this isn't necessarily a new thing that we're building on our existing work, and local governments are already doing a lot of this work. And so we want to continue to build on that and make sure that we have sufficient resources to do this for everybody.
Bill, if I could just add on here, since DLCD has budget for this biennium, we're putting together our agency request budget for the 23-25 biennium. And as a key part of that, we're doing outreach with community benefit organizations to make sure we understand their needs, but we also just released a survey to our local government partners, including Bend has one, to understand kind of their priorities and which kind of order of things they see coming forward. So we make sure that we get a request budget to meet those needs for the next biennium.
And to further add on a bit, sorry. We're also thinking about beyond plans and actually getting stuff built and working with our government partners who do provide those resources to try to see if we can get some housing resources from Housing Community Resources, or Housing Community Services, ODOT, DEQ, like trying to figure out how we can actually build these up, both the land use parts and the transportation parts. So we're doing a lot of cross state looks at the resources needed.
Any other questions? Angie Brewer, I see that you zoomed in for us today and you haven't spoken. Is there anything you would like to add?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I don't have anything to add. I'm the Central Oregon Regional Representative from DLCD, and I'm grateful that the CFEC team was able to join you in person and provide you the most accurate presentation possible of all this content. They did a much better job than I could have done trying to repeat it. Although I'm grateful to hear it. I've heard it twice now, and it's great information, and I'm grateful for them to join us today.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's nice to know who our local rep is on this. So great to see you, Angie. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions? I think the only burning question is, are Evan and Bill related? Have you guys done 23andMe to find out? I think you probably ought to. So that's my last comment. And I will say thank you, Bill, Evan, Cody, Angie, Kevin. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, helping us understand this. It's really, really important work that you're doing. And thank you for helping us try and understand.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Well, I'm sure we'll see you again. All right, that brings us to item number 8, which is an update on the bike share program. I think many of us will be excited to learn about this. We have Tobias Marks. Is that right, Toby? Are you with us here today?
I am
Hi,
right here.
Of course. Take it away.
Thanks. Andrea, can I share the presentation that I prepared from my screen?
I put them in the, I mean, either way, they're in our slide deck, Tyler.
Yeah, you can, Toby, you can just pull it up if you'd like to.
Okay. That sounds great. Just give me a moment to do that. And then we're going to get going. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry that I noticed that my picture is like really weird. I think I'm getting a new tablet soon, but I always look like I'm somewhere in the fog. And sometimes I feel like somehow in the fog, but not today. I'm actually excited to be here and to give you an update about the bike share program. It has been a while. It has been a lot of work, a lot of dead ends, bumps in the road, but we're really, really close to relaunch a bike share program within the next 2 months.
Oh, wow.
And so this is made possible through the support that we received from the MPO. And so I'm going to run through this presentation, and then I'm here for questions. I'll do this as quick as I can without not rushing through it. So as you know, just a little refresher, the Zexter bike share program in Bend closed in 2020 because of COVID. Zexter operated 55 docked bikes. At one point, they had about 10 or 12-ish stations, mainly in the downtown and west side areas, connecting a few good locations there. Since Zexter closed down, City of Bend Transportation Mobility Department and in partnership with OSU Mobility Lab have tried to find a way to bring bike share back. We received funding from the MPO in 2021 to relaunch a bike share program. At that time, our plans were to receive old bikes from Portland Bureau of Transportation from the Bike Town program up there, to revamp them, restructure them, and launch that as a bike system in Bend. Those plans fell apart for a multitude of reasons, but the main reason was really that we wanted to work with a new nonprofit partner. The bikes needed a specific controller. That controller was not available. Supply chain was from 2 to 3 months delay, ended up being 16 months delayed. And we said, we don't really want to do that. By the time we would launch, who knows what's going to come. And so we shifted gears. At that time, we shifted gears. And since then, we are now in the pre-launch phase to launch a 2-year bike share pilot program in the city of Bend. This will be a citywide program with dockless pedal assist e-bikes. The scheduled launch is this summer. We are initially launching the program with 200 bikes across 20 pickup and drop-off locations. And the regulations that we are writing allows to expand that program up to 300 bikes. However, we also build some flexibility in that if we actually see the usage, if we see the need, we could adjust that number and make it even larger if needed. We are now, since yesterday, in the final stages to permit one vendor to operate in that program. And if you couldn't guess what the vendor is from the pictures, I'll do a little trivia later, so pay good attention to every picture in this presentation. Little hint, there is only one. We are planning a demo day with our vendor in the middle of May. And if all goes well, we hope to launch in early June. We will most likely decide in the next week or so if we're actually able to launch Memorial Day weekend, which would be great. So how we're doing this is that the key to success really is to pick up a lot of the things that we talked about in the TSP, a lot of what we know our councilors have in their council goals, and to really make bike share part of a multimodal transit system that achieves these goals that we have in the TSP and that our city council has. So one of the keys to success is the creation of neighborhood mobility points. And I'm pronouncing that P probably as strong as I can, being German and all, but I'm doing it on purpose because we all know that there is a feasibility study that CET is doing where they're evaluating the feasibility of mobility hubs, which mobility hubs are generally larger, really modal hubs that have a lot of more amenities, where this focus with these neighborhood mobility points is really of micromobility and how micromobility can now connect other transit nodes. So I'm really excited that we're actually using the MPO funds that we have for bike share to create infrastructure to operate the bike share program across the city of Bend. So we are creating about 20 mini or small neighborhood mobility points that will have bike racks that are mainly available for the bike share program, but that also create a public benefit that everybody else can also use them if they want to go to different areas. These mobility points will be clearly marked, they will be clearly signed, they will have other amenities, not only bike share, they all are connected to a current transit stop. They will also be connected to current and future microtransit shuttle stops, so that really from when we launch this, it really becomes the first step into that multimodal thing where we have the fixed route that CETs is operating, we have the summer shuttles like the River Shuttle and others, and wherever people come to these, they also can jump onto a bike and rent it and move across town. In the future, we hope that these neighborhood mobility points can actually be expanded to include neighborhood and neighborhood wayfinding, but also neighborhood info kiosks. So we are thinking digital kiosks that can connect with transit so that whatever service stops there can be visible. And we also hope that we can populate neighborhood information that is important to the area and other things. We hope we can expand to EV charging and EM charging. And I put EM charging for not only because it's my wife's initials and I always like to read them, but also because it's short for me for electric mobility, so that people can charge their e-bike or could charge their devices that they have. That said, here's a quick overview of these neighborhood mobility points that we are trying to build. I know it's very, very small. I'm sorry, it's always hard to take a big map and get it not be small on the screen. So basically, we spread them out, as you can see, east as far as St. Charles, west as far as COCC, and Northwest Crossing. And then really going initially with the ones that the city is constructing to more destination hubs, right? Like downtown, but also Hawthorne stations, Galveston, Newport, West Side Yard, Box Factory, so all those. However, and this now becomes really cool actually, Those are the ones that we're building in the right of way that we can build. And then our operator will also start, as soon as City Council knows, which is hopefully happening tomorrow, that we will give them the okay to reach out to private stakeholders like Bend Parks and Rec, private destinations, to say, look, if you have bike racks anywhere, just let us add that to the bike share program. Because we think that the more dense our network is for pickup and drop off locations, the more people will be encouraged to use it and also do the right thing, meaning not leaving a bike at the street corner, but put it to where it should go. And we hope that we can learn from that, and that our pathway through this 2-year program that we are building and starting in May, June, we have a clear path at the end that the last 4 months of the program will be used to present a code change to City Council that will make programs like this permanent, that then has an RFP process, so that when this 2-year pilot program ends on May 31st, 2024, the permanent program can continue on June 1st, 2024, so that there would be no interruption. And so it's not like one of those endless City of Bend pilots, right? Hey, let's start a pilot, and then in 10 years it's still a pilot. Now there's a clear path to actually put the stake in the ground, plant the seed, and work towards a permanent program at the end. And that's all I have. I promised it was quick for a change. And what questions do you have?
Thank you, Toby. I'm so very excited about this. I see Councillor Perkins has her hand up. Councillor Perkins, go ahead.
I don't have any questions. I'm just really excited about this. This is so cool. And this is even better than it was before. So I'm so looking forward to it. And please invite me to demo day. I'd love to be there.
Okay, we'll do that.
Here. Anyone else? Comments or questions? Go ahead, Andrea.
Toby, do you have, are you looking at a pricing structure yet, or membership, any potential for having discounts based on the bike share program put together in the Rogue Valley? We had anyone on public assistance got free membership, anything like that. Is Bert, or I'm assuming you have to work with Bert on that?
Yep, so we're working with Bert on that. I do not have the exact numbers yet, but I do know that there will be like hourly, daily, monthly rates, and there will be an accessibility, like an accessible and equity-based, income-based rate that's available as well.
Thanks.
Anyone else? I don't see any more questions. Toby, thank you so much. Thanks for coming. Yeah, I think we'd all like to be invited for demo day. This will be really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is other business, and I don't have any, but Tyler, want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, Hobie, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this to your attention. It's just our Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, which when there's major amendments will come to you after a 21-day public process. So the 21-day public comment period will be happening soon, and then we'll be going to ask the policy board to review an amendment to the North Corridor project next month. So I just wanted to give that to you as this is coming up. And if you have any questions or you have anything about this project, we're going to be adding quite a few millions into the project, but it's still to the same level that the Oregon Transportation Commission had approved initially for the project. And if you have any questions, I know Bob knows a lot more about this project than I do, but I wanted to just give you a heads up that major amendment will be out for public comment. So as we get anything, we'll be talking about it in May.
Just to add a little clarification, there's going to be some unusual timing for Bend City councilors, because I think the plan is to be on the May 4th agenda to talk about the city funding. And just like always, you know, it's chicken and egg.
Yeah.
SIP amendments just mean for MPO policy board, you're basically increasing our credit limit, but it doesn't come with the actual funds, right? So that, like the city's 9.8, that has to be adopted through your city council process. Even though you're increasing our credit limit, we don't have the money until you approve it. So it's kind of a weird balance, but I know we're working on a presentation with Eric for council meeting early May, so that you'll have a lot of information before even the May 17th meeting. Or for MPO, I can't, or thinking off the top.
You're right.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's right.
That's on the Tuesday. But so just, yeah, more to come on that. Just wanted to get it on everybody's radar. Thanks, Hobie, because this is our final one. We have the contractor on board. We can't sign the official contract till June until all this is done, but we have price, we have schedule, we have scope. And so under the design build, it's a little bit different time frame, but these will be the last approvals, and, you know, barring something weird happening in the future or unknown, but pretty exciting to be closing this out and finding additional funds even to address the market conditions that we're in right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robert. Looking forward to that. We're all anxious to have that project get started. Lastly, today we've got another opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone that would like to address the MPO Policy Board? I don't see any hands. Our next meeting will be on May 17th. You were exactly right, Bob. On May 17th at noon. It will be an in-person meeting. Woohoo! That will be at the county building. Is that right, Tyler?
Yes, I'll confirm that, but it's already booked. We just have to confirm the logistics of the hybrid part.
Great. So if anyone is not able to attend in person, we will have a hybrid option for folks to participate remotely. But I personally will look forward to seeing people in person. Woo! Phil, I see you've got your hand up.
On the 17th, I have a conflicting event. I have to go to a Health Heroes event with the Public Health Advisory Board. It will be nearby at the county, so I probably will be able to get over to the MPO meeting a half hour or 45 minutes in, but I just wanted to give everyone the heads up that I will not be there at the beginning. And so if that creates any kind of quorum issues, we should figure that out now or sometime between now and then.
So
I see Chris.
Chris Doty. Yep.
I also have a conflict at that time, so we can ask Peter Russell, Commissioner, to step in and fill the quorum.
And we can shift some things around if we need to, but all right. Good to know. Keep us on board with it and we'll figure it out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Chang. We can arrange the agenda to accommodate that. I appreciate that. All right. Anyone else? Any final thoughts, comments, questions? Seeing none, I will adjourn this meeting of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.